how to engage with us tonight. So we are hoping that you will be active in the chat, share your thoughts and your comments, and be speaking with each other. And use the Q&A button at the bottom to submit some questions. We'll be taking questions towards the end of the evening for our panelists. So we hope you'll send those there. We'll also grab them from the chat if we need to, but it's a big help if you use that tool for submitting those questions. So from the Cathedral, on behalf of Dean Hollerith, we are excited to have you. We're excited to have all of our fantastic folks. I want to give a special shout out to the Reverend Dr. Kelly Brown Douglas and Greg Garrett for being the co-founders of this event starting a number of years ago. And before we get started, I want to also thank particularly the many partners who have helped to make this event happen over the years. So Broderick Johnson and the March on Washington Film Festival has been a great partner in helping us think through what films we're showing. The Austin Film Festival and Greg Garrett has brought Baylor University on board. So we're pleased to have Baylor University with us as well. And I think that's all of us. So one final note, there should be live caption options on your computer. So there's a button on the bottom that says live transcript. So you can click that and turn those captions on or off. If they help you, that's great. It's a robot, so it's not always perfect, but if it's useful to you, we hope that it's helpful. So with that, thanks to those of you who have signed up and registered, and I'm going to turn it over to Broderick to tell you a little bit more about this evening's program and the Long, Long Way film event.
Good evening, and thank you, Michelle, for the introduction and opportunity to open part 2 of the Long, Long Way film series. As Michelle mentioned, my name is Broderick Johnson, and I'm the producer of the March on Washington Film Festival. Our film festival is a nonprofit organization that develops content to celebrate the unsung heroes and often untold stories of the civil rights movement. Our work involves curating content and generating new ideas to showcase activists and artists who have impacted the social justice movement through various mediums of storytelling, including film, music, art, and other digital and live content. Over the past 4 years, we have partnered with the Washington National Cathedral for our annual film festival and tonight's annual film series and dialogue, a Long, Long Way film series. The Cathedral reached out to us to take part in their first virtual film weekend, and because of our longstanding partnership, we immediately jumped on board in support. Tonight's event is about re-examining and understanding the historical context of film, where each of these 3 films will help us realize that there are so many levels of messaging that emerges when watching or rewatching as a viewer. The 3 clips from Casablanca, Crash, and Black Panther will help unpack themes about human dignity, conflict, resolution, redemption, and most importantly, opportunity, because we still have a long, long way to go. Tonight's participants include the Reverend Dr. Kelly Brown Douglas, Dean of the Episcopal Divinity School at the Union Theological Seminary and Canon theologian at the Washington National Cathedral. Dr. Greg Garrett, English professor at Baylor University and author of A Long, Long Way, Hollywood's Unfinished Journey from Racism to Reconciliation. And also Philip Rodriguez, an award-winning documentary filmmaker and founder of City Projects, a production company whose film and educational programs challenge ideas about race and diversity. Without further ado, I would also like to introduce you to tonight's moderator, Sonia Williams, a multi-award-winning writer and producer and professor at Howard University. Thank you.
Good evening. Welcome, everyone. And I see from the chat that we have folks from all over the country, from California, Oregon, West Virginia, right here in DC, Colorado, Texas. And so welcome to all of you, wherever you are. And this is the magic of this virtual world, that we're able to come into this room and be here together tonight. And you're in for a treat. There are some distinguished panelists who are going to help us conduct a lively conversation and interchange about the role of race in a diverse set of films dating back to 1942 with Casablanca, 2005 with Crash, and the 2018 mega hit Black Panther. We hope that you've all had an opportunity to watch or rewatch these films And at the end of our conversation, we invite you to ask questions and present your comments, critique what you've seen and what you've heard, and just engage. So we're really excited because we have some fine panelists with Reverend Canon Kelly Brown Douglas, Dr. Greg Garrett, and award-winning documentary filmmaker Philip Rodriguez. So to start things off, I want to use some of the words written by Professor Garrett, who has written that race and media are inextricably linked, that some people have used media in general and film specifically to perpetuate harmful stereotypes or present warped narratives, often from a white gaze. But Dr. Garrett has also indicated that movies can push past stereotypes, speak truth to power, and move audiences from hate towards understanding. So, with that in mind, Greg, I want to ask you if you can help us get started with this evening's conversation by giving us a brief introduction to the clip that we're going to see from Casablanca.
Oh, absolutely. Professor Williams, thank you so much. And it is first a joy to be with you someplace other than the front seat of my car, which is where we did the first piece of this program. And looking at our guests for tonight, I want to give a special welcome to Ellie from Davis, California, who was at our first program in 2018 at the Guest Who's Coming to Dinner program. And also to my second mother, Doris Mabry, who is checking in with us tonight from Maryville, Tennessee. Bless you, Doris. We are getting ready to watch a scene that takes place right in the middle of Casablanca. And it is a scene that sets up the best of Casablanca and the worst of Casablanca. It is a scene where we're getting ready to move into the flashback to Paris, where we discover some things about Rick and Ilsa's relationship. And as is true for much of the first half of Casablanca, Sam, played by Dooley Wilson, is at the heart of what's going on in this film. And so basically what's happening is that Ilsa, who left Rick in Paris, has come to Casablanca to Rick's club and very much complicated his life. And Rick, who is a tremendously broken human being, is sitting and drinking and thinking about what might happen next. And so that's sort of the context for the film, which I know that most of you have seen or seen many times.
All right. Well, thank you for helping to set that up, Greg. And so I'm going to come back to you. In your book, The Long, Long Way, you indicate that Sam, played by Dooley Wilson, is essentially a strong character and one who represents an example of progress in terms of the depiction of relationships between black and white characters on screen, particularly if you look at it in relationship to earlier films from Hollywood. So can you explain that, exactly what you meant by this and how this character or this relationship is a particularly strong one?
Well, exactly. And you know, what we are doing tonight is we are talking about the continuum from Birth of a Nation in 1915 to Black Panther. And so I am in this very interesting place, which is what the Long, Long Way Film Festival has always leaned into. The idea that we'll interrogate these texts for what they can teach us and be critical about the places where they fall short. And so I am in a place first as a film historian where I say this represents some baby steps in Hollywood's depiction of race. African-American critics from 1942 thought of Sam's depiction as the most humane depiction that they had seen on screen up to that point. But as a theologian, I also have to lean into my 2021 reality, which says that baby steps are not enough. That what we are looking for after 400 years of racism in America is giant steps. So what I'd like to do is to point out a couple of things about what Casablanca does that earlier films don't do. And I'm going to trust that my friends and colleagues on this panel are going to point out some of the other places where it falls short, because it certainly does. But here is, let me just launch sort of two things into the conversation, and then we can move into what some other folks have to say. if we move from 2015 and the 1920s and 1930s, what we're looking at is a Hollywood that either depicts people of color as subhuman or unhuman, or it ignores them completely. Then with Casablanca, we have got a moment where, even setting a very low bar, we are finding some movement forward. At the very beginning of Casablanca, Rick is asked by another saloon owner in Casablanca if he will sell him Sam. And Sam says, and Rick, the Humphrey Bogart character says very matter-of-factly, "I don't buy or sell human beings." And this is a very, very low bar to set. But comparing this to Birth of a Nation and to the racism that is part of Hollywood history up to this point, the very real acknowledgement from the very beginning of the film that Sam is every bit as human as Rick is an important thing. And then what I love about this scene is that even though it plays into some stereotypes about African Americans as entertainers, and over again, Rick is asked to play as time goes by. And in fact, the catchphrase is, although it never appears in the film, is "Play it again, Sam."
Right.
There is this moment where Sam is sitting there and he is playing on the piano, and he is playing a little something of his own. And I love the fact that for a tiny moment in this film, his creativity and his enjoyment is more important than his performative task. And again, these are baby steps. And I want to emphasize that. We can do so much better. But comparing this to what has come before, this is a very real step in Hollywood's development. And I think that's where I would leave it.
Okay. Kelly, you have indicated you have some strong feelings about the Sam character in this film, both Sam as he's presented as a musician and as he's presented as a man. So you want to talk about that, please?
Yeah. And so first of all, thank you. And it really is a pleasure and an honor to be on this panel with each of you and in this discussion, and to be back with my friend Greg after all of these many years in this dialogue where we've continued to learn and from one another. And I've certainly learned a lot from Greg. I come as a film lover, a movie lover, as well as, of course, a theologian. So I don't come here with any expertise as a film critic, but as one who loves film, watches a lot of film, and tries to look simply at film, not simply sometimes as entertainment, sometimes it is just that. But what are the messages that it is sending? Particularly, I know that we can look at film sort of backwards in and bring our own sensibilities from 21st century sensibilities to a 20th century film. And that's fraught. But you know, what is the film saying in its time? And who is the film for? Who is the audience that the film is for? And film is not innocuous, even as entertainment. It can carry forth stereotypes. It's not benign, and film is a part of a discourse that allows us to it shapes our imagination, it shapes our understanding of reality. So even as it represents that. So when I look at Sam, you know, the opening scene of Casablanca, I must say that I only watched Casablanca once, and then I watched it again for this, and I thought, the opening scene, we find Sam, of course, playing the piano with all of the stereotypic characteristics, all of the tropes, you know, eyes bulging, et cetera. And this is our entryway into, this is what frames who Sam is for the audience. That is the opening scene of Sam, the bulging eye, Black entertainer. And as we move on into this film, even in this scene, that was the scene that just set up this discussion, we don't see Sam and Rick is equals in any way, Sam continues to call Rick boss. And what we never discover about Sam, we talk about Rick considers him a human being because he says, well, I don't sell humans, yet he is never developed as a human being. The only thing that we know about Sam is he is beholden to his white boss. He has no life apart from his white boss. And so he's this sort of docile character that is beholden to his white boss. And what strikes me, and I'll say this quickly and move on, is that even if you juxtapose this to Birth of a Nation, right? And this movie, you either have the Black man as this beast, this dangerous beast, which was Birth of the Nation, or for a white audience to accept the Black man on screen, if he's not a dangerous beast, he has to be this docile character. And so you have these two tropes, really, of anti-Blackness, and the only way in which the Black male can be accepted is either dangerous, so you lock them up or lynch them in that time, or in this docile character that is beholden to his boss master. So Rick calls Sam. I don't know that we ever find out Sam's last name. And Sam calls Rick boss. And so they ain't friends. Though Rick would claim he was a friend, that's sort of the way those the children of Mammy would say, oh, but we really love her, and you know, she's a part of the family. Mammy knew she wasn't part of the family. And they didn't know anything about Mammy apart from the way in which she served them. And that's the same for Sam. We know nothing about Sam, and neither does Rick really, apart from the way in which Rick is loyal, trying to save Sam, the white man. So I think I've said enough for now.
Yeah, I think
say how I feel, huh?
Exactly. Now, Philip, you also had some thoughts about the way in which race from a broader perspective. I mean, this is a movie that takes place in a North African city. Casablanca is in Morocco. Morocco is in Africa. And yet, do we get a sense of that? Or do we get a sense of the fact that this is 1942 or 1941 in Africa during World War II, and there was a reason why you had this set of people from other places, refugees there, who were trying to get out to go to other places of safety. So could you talk a little bit about that, please?
You know, thank you, first of all, for the opportunity to be here. And I'm like Kelly, who's very articulate. I'm not an expert in film. I make some. Thought about these things a bit, not enough.
Right.
You know, Casablanca, like so many, you know, I think that one of the values of conversations like this, that we are at the verge of a demographic changing the guard. Okay, the country becoming non-white, should it survive all the challenges. Majority non-white has numerous implications, and so one of the things we're doing is, historians are doing it and film critics are doing it, we're reconsidering the founding texts of the country. We're reconsidering, is the fetish over the founding fathers kind of some version of ethno-nationalism? What is it we need to rewrite? What is it we simply need to destroy? Simply let go. How much apologetics is due certain artifacts of the culture, and how much destruction is necessary in order for us to move on and have conversations that have a better footing, that start with that don't start with a premise of white supremacy and how we need to apologize for it in any form. So, you know, I'm sorry, Sonia, I'm not answering your question right now because I have other feelings that I think are more interesting to me at the moment.
Go for it.
You know, as my father, dark-skinned Mexican-American man, born and raised during the Depression in Los Angeles, as he lay in his deathbed, we watched a lot of pictures. And one of the pictures I think that meant the most for him was Casablanca. And I wondered, through the lens of this dark-skinned Mexican-American man, a fine man, self-taught, educated man, a curious man. What did he see? How did he read the Blackness? How did he read Rick's whiteness? How did he read Rick's, post-war existentialism? And how did he understand third world country, the poor country, and what, what was his reading? He fetishized this film. He loved this film. This film was very meaningful to him. But I can't help but think, and God bless, I admire my father a great deal, but how much did those pictures prejudice him against himself?
Mm.
How much of those renderings of non-white servility, of white heroism, even if the character is wretched, fundamentally, morally, not salvageable. Does a Rick in the real life make a maneuver like that? How did that alter his way of seeing his own self, his own life in America? And so I think these conversations at macro level are very valuable, because I think we have to look at every aspect of, if we're genuinely going to renegotiate race and power going forward, everything's got to be on the table, and some things aren't worth resuscitating, and some things aren't going to make the next generation.
Right. One of the things, Greg, that you talk about in the book is that you say that the scene with, I guess it's the flashback scene with Rick and Sam and Elsa in Paris, and how you believe that that's an example of inclusivity, and that shows that they were interracial connectivity and getting along. But you also have that juxtaposed with when it goes back to the present and Elsa comes into Rick's bar. And she's sitting at the table. Sam walks up to it. No, I'm sorry, he's playing. And then she says, "Oh, tell that boy." Talking about Sam. Now, this is someone that you said in the Paris scene, they were connected, drinking champagne together and having a good time. And yet, here we are, I don't know how many months or a year later, then you have this. So how do you see that as being an example of inclusivity? And yet, very, very shortly thereafter, you have this scene where she calls him a boy.
I know. And that is a very real question. And, I'm actually coming back to my earlier statement about baby steps. So in the Paris flashback, as some of you will remember, they are in La Belle Aurore, and they are drinking the champagne before the Nazis arrive. And there's this momentary scene where each of them, Rick and Sam and Ilsa, toast each other. And so there is this sort of mutual acknowledgement in that moment. And yet, Professor Williams, as you're pointing out, when Ilsa walks into the bar, she asks, who is that boy? Is that the Sam that I think I remember? And so when we take that into consideration, when we take all of the different commands for Sam to entertain on command, when we think about the way that Sam disappears in the last half of the film, and my friend Canon Douglas pointed this out in our conversation the other day, it's like at the end of the movie, Rick has a new best friend. And there is a very real sense that we can point out a couple of positive moments, and yet certainly from our standpoint where we sit right now, we see all of these places where the film fails us, and where the film fails Sam. And what Kelly was saying earlier about, we don't know who he is, we don't know his story, we don't know what he cares about. I think that there would be a great movie about Sam, but this absolutely is not it. And halfway through this movie, right after the flashback, in fact, Sam just really sort of disappears. And it is such an interesting and painful thing. In the play that Casablanca is based on, for example, it's Sam who leads the singing of the French national anthem, which is one of the primary points in the film. The Germans are singing their song, and everybody else is singing this song. But in Casablanca, they turn to a white character, the freedom fighter, who's Ilsa's husband, and he leads the song. And so there is this, I mean, it is painful for me to acknowledge, but it's like he is presented initially as an important person and he disappears throughout the rest of the film.
May I say something?
Yeah, please.
I from your book, Greg, I gleaned a very interesting insight that the fact, in some respects, although I think it's a backwards film vis-a-vis the black and white thing, in terms of the Jewish, the roles of Jews play and Jewish emigres that wrote the film, that directed the film, that are featured in the film, people like Peter Lorre. It's a very interesting homage the film ends up to being to the tenacity, the cleverness, the survival of the European Jews. And I think that's a really, really interesting insight that I gleaned from your book about this. And then when I watch the film going forward, I want to think about it in those terms, because and that maybe that's one of the reasons film does indeed endure as a classic.
Right.
Can I ask a question to that though? May I
Please
ask a question to that and maybe complicate it a little? Yes, to that film, but I also wondered, I mean, this film is in, of course, 1942, was it 42?
Yeah.
It is about the Vichy government and in Morocco. And we know that the Vichy government, as it was moved across North Africa and Tunisia and Algeria and Morocco, that they were also in more than complicit with the Nazis, that they also had some very anti-Semitic, very more than dehumanizing. They were anti-Semitic laws that they put in place. We also know that the Vichy government cooperated in sending many Jews, particularly from North Africa, to concentration camps. So the movie, I kept asking myself, right, we don't see any of this in the film. And so that the film, and it's like, and knowing who made it, it's like, what is the point? Who is the audience? What is the point of this? Is this serving as propaganda so that we see two kind of, when we talk about these racial narratives, right? Or these white supremacist narratives, or these the great good white American narratives that comes all throughout this Casablanca, and it's the most, you know, I'm not so much stunned by the way in which Sam is treated. I mean, you know, he wasn't treated worse in terms of his character is probably stunning, and that's Greg's baby steps. But the lack of complexity in recognition of what was going on between the Vichy government and the Nazis, and that Rick could so easily walk away and be friends, you know, that it's almost this cartoony character, the head of the Vichy, sort of the police there, and it wasn't like that, and Jewish people wouldn't have. The Moroccan Jews had a little more leeway, but not the refugee Jews. They were treated very poorly and shipped off to concentration camps. So I just, that part of Casablanca, so your question of, does it need to die? Certain films, at least if they're revived, and which is what we're doing now, have to be deeply interrogated for the message they were sending, because it's not benign.
Absolutely right.
Right. And, you know, one of the questions that came up in the chat is that someone said they believe that Casablanca resonates with first generation immigrants and with refugees, because it's universal in that regard. The whole idea of getting away from something and moving towards something that they hope is better. But again, we don't see that necessarily played out in the film at all. So. Anything else you want to add? Because I want to move into Crash in a second. Yes.
Yeah, Professor Williams, if I could just jump in real quick. Film is a terrible medium for talking about politics or anything complicated that's abstract. And Casablanca wrecks everything. So like, as my friend Canon Douglas is saying, the Vichy government was awful. and Casablanca doesn't represent the way the French government and the French forces were working. So like these letters of transit are signed by General de Gaulle, who would have had absolutely no standing in Vichy French, in Vichy French territory. And at the end of the movie, they are going off to a free French colony. And so basically it was just like, we're going to throw a whole bunch of stuff at the screen and expect that you're not going to think too deeply about this, because there are very real differences between these iterations of French government. And so it is just kind of a mess, but that also is very typical of Hollywood film. It is very hard to relate complicated political systems through images and story. And so it is just, it is full of factual mistakes.
I want to take an issue with your comment, Greg. I think that your comment applies well to Hollywood product, but I think there are plenty of cinemas in the world that investigate, that do a better job with politics and intended to do so. And certainly a lot of the cinema from the third world that came out in response to Hollywood's hegemony, Africa, Latin America, and Asia, were terrifically powerful politically and complex. So the Hollywood project is very specific. As Bertolt Brecht called it, the other narcotic. It was intention to flatten the world and to simplify things and to insist on white American innocence. It was a fundamental part of the selling point, right?
Well, I want to say one last thing, and then I want to move on to Crash, and that is one of our audience members said it's important to remember that this film in 1942, a lot of America was America first. They didn't want to get involved in the war. We were forced into it once, we were bombed, but it was stay out of the war, and the context of what this film comes out of is important. So that's something to remember. All right, so I want to move on to Crash. Thanks so much for that. In terms of Crash, here we have now 63 years later from Casablanca. We move into a story from Hollywood again. That's an ensemble piece. And so now you're looking at an intense snapshot of Black, Latino, Middle Eastern, Asian, and white characters whose lives intersect in the Los Angeles of the early 2000s. Now, this film was released in the shadow of the 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Center, and of course in New York, here at the Pentagon, right down in Northern Virginia, and then the down plane in Pennsylvania. So, Philip, can you help us set up the piece we're going to see?
Yeah. I'm the LA guy, so I get Crash. Okay.
Yes.
I've been into quite a few myself, and not just metaphorical. Okay, so this film won the Oscar in 2006. It was produced, co-written, and directed by a white man, Paul Haggis, who, according to the publicity party, the publicity arm of the Lionsgate studio that released it, was inspired to write this film by his own experience of being a victim of a carjacking attempt. Now, the car happened to be a Porsche, which the studio's publicity department takes pains to remind us. Porsche, and so Crash sold itself as a drama examining the human condition intertwined with the untreated racial prejudice in America. This film's reputation has not aged well. Film Comment placed Crash first on their list of the worst winners of Best Picture Oscars. The Atlantic identified the film's victory as among the most glaring mistakes made by the Academy Awards. Okay, this scene, Sandra Bullock, wife of the city DA, sees that Locksmith, played by Michael Peña, is a tattooed Latino, and she demands that her husband, Rick, played by Brendan Fraser, who's a testament to white privilege in and of himself, has the locks changed. She demands that the locks are changed again. So.
All right, so Philip, as a longtime resident of Los Angeles and a filmmaker whose work really powerfully examines the lives of some notable Mexican Americans, what do you have to say about this? Listen,
I don't know if my snide introduction gave it away. Yeah. but I loathe this film, honestly. And it's very interesting that, Greg, what you characterize as casual multiculturalism, I find to be the most self-conscious, pained, and cruel expression of interracial relationships, and off the charts, really. Now, this city, this filmmaker, like most films, come out of this place. And part of the setup and part of the zeitgeist that this film emerges from is the '92 riots, the Rodney King riots. Of course, we all remember that this Black motorist was beaten senseless by 4 LAPD cops, who were then released on charges, found not guilty by a white jury. This resulted in a week of sensational violence that I remember, viscerally. It's in my spinal column. Those days, the absolute rage and confusion, and so for me as an audience member, and this is very anecdotal, of course, I when I saw that film, and I felt more rage. It rekindled my rage. The notion that a privileged white would insist on this particular version of representing race relations that were very fraught, and also on the verge of a different kind of renegotiation healing. And this is very remedial. This is very dishonest. This film reflects an absolute ignorance. A film reveals a kind of exploiting racial problems without, for me, revealing anything useful about them. As a Latino, the one character, and fundamentally, I say the biggest problem with the film for me is that the characters, the white characters that show no, that signal no effort to learn or to redeem themselves, are indeed redeemed by the film. The Matt Dillon character, who's a pig, cowboy cop, who molests Thandie Newton's character, an African-American woman at a traffic stop, is magically redeemed in a scene by the film, in which Thandie Newton is burning in a car, and Matt Dillon's character saves her. The Sandra Bullock character, likewise, is a mean-spirited, wretched, racist misanthrope all the way across the board, who's by the end of the film redeemed because she sprains her ankle, and all of a sudden she realizes she loves her maid, and she embraces the maid like Rick embraces Sam, an inferior, a dependent, and so to me, this is what, shortcut healing, which is dishonest and a cheat, and it's the kind of cheats that white liberals have always loved. If I vote for Barack Obama, I have no Black friends. I've never dated a Black person. I'm afraid of Blacks fundamentally, but if I vote for him, I get a pass. I get a way out. It's a cheap way of buying redemption for yourself. And so to me, the film is a zero. And I think rightly that history is proving it, and certainly more and more critics. And again, so let's remember those who embrace this film. Well, the Academy itself, notoriously white, notoriously old people, notoriously conservative. These people are Beverly Hills denizens. These people exhibit one of the most, very severely white enclave with a highly militarized police force that keeps everybody else out, that fought vigorously against freeways or subway tubes, so that they wouldn't have to deal with the dirty citizenry. So, and secondly, the film critic corps, all white, effectively, right? The whole apparatus of publicizing films, of receiving films, in that era specifically, was, with one exception, who was a Mexican American, was white liberal. So to me, this is film reveals us a certain kind of dishonesty, an incapacity to sensitively and productively render race relations. Other than that, I think it's a really great accomplishment.
Other than that, Well, I think you have some camaraderie with Kelly, because Kelly had some strong feelings about Crash as well. So, Kelly, you want to talk about how does this film attempt to deal with race, interpersonal relationships, and even faith?
Mm.
Yeah, uh, thank you. When I first saw this film, um, it left me, well, angry. And it really did. And I said, I will never, some films you see say, oh, I want to see that film again. I said, I will never see this film again. And so it took me a long time to rewatch it for this discussion. And it did. And I didn't rewatch it until today. And it's one of the films that make you ask, so who was this precisely made for? And you recognize, of course, who it was made for. What, and I think, and I'll answer your question, particularly if you talk about faith. I think one of the things that really just made me cringe throughout the film, one, the realness it made me cringe, the realness of that man's hands on Tandy Newton. It was like, oh my God. And Philip's right, then he gets redeemed in the end. This film seemed to take pains to redeem the white characters. And it didn't do that with the Black characters or any of the other characters of color. And it really kept them in these really rigid stereotypes that it didn't do anything to try to interrogate, yet we were, or make more complex in a real way, yet they made these white characters, particularly Matt Dillon's character, more complex, and Ryan Philippe's character sort of more, he killed somebody, by golly, and then put
And
that.
I was just going to say, and once again, the first person to get killed in the film is somebody Black.
Somebody Black, right. And even so, all of the Black characters were very in some way not only stereotyped but flawed, deeply flawed kind of human beings that they didn't do anything with. And I really even Howard's character and Tandy, this character, the stereotype of these middle-class Black people that are not in touch with their Blackness in some way. And then, you can't tell me this was an accident. Then they made them these light complexioned Black people. And so they fulfilled this stereotype of colorism. And so the whole movie, and then you get the Black police officer who's dating the Latinx woman, but his mother is a drug addict. His father is not on the scene. And then his brother ends up the dead character holding his St. Christopher thing. And so really when you, in absent really from the film is church or any kind of sort of religious institution, yet the film does this cheap grace redemption of the white characters. Right. And so it is this sort of cheap grace redemption of these white characters, while you still have the characters of color sort of still painted in this really flawed way, and you aren't understanding what redemption, what their redemption looks like, yeah. And so, but the white characters not only get redeemed, but they save. Right? They save Ryan Philippe's character. Why did he pick the young man up on the side of the road and he tries to save the character? And it's like he doesn't want to be saved. And then in the end, of course, you have Matt Dillon, who saves the woman that he practically raped, saves her. And, and then at the end, you feel even more sorry for him because his father is sitting there frail. So there's so many things that are troubling about this, but clearly this film was made for a white audience, and it doesn't raise the barometer for them, because I think a film can help you open up your moral imagination. It can interrogate stereotypes. This film didn't do that. It lived right into them.
Well, now, Kelly, I'm going to go to Greg because I think his viewpoint is opposite. He says that in Greg, obviously in your book, you write that Crash, you see Crash as constructed as a series of parables. And these parables are stories that might exert a positive influence on audience members. So can you talk about how you saw this being the case?
Yeah, and absolutely, as the one person who looks like me tonight, Kelly is absolutely right. This is a film that is made for people like me who look like me. And God, we are talking baby steps tonight. And again, that is no defense for the last 400 years of racism in America. But over and over again, I've had the experience when I've taught this film where people have had some moments of recognition. And just to sort of complicate a tiny bit what Philip had said about the critics and their response to this film. And it is the most sort of notorious best picture film ever. But I would,
I don't know about ever. You can put Green Book in there.
Green Book would be up there. Driving Miss Daisy would be up there.
Driving Miss Daisy, yes.
But I do want to just sort of insert into the conversation the African American Film Critics Association, which is the largest association of reviewers of films of African descent, picked this film as their top film of 2005. And in their response to it, they said it is not a perfect film, but it is bringing this question up in a way that we can talk about it. And the president of the African American Film Critics Association said that this year, what Crash, Brokeback Mountain, and North Country all share is the expression of our universal humanity. And I want to lean into the character of Jean, because I will admit that the Matt Dillon character, like the Matt Dillon and Tandy Newton scene, was on the broadsheet of the film. That was the promotional thing that the movie tried to put in front of us. But I want to lean into what Philip was saying about how mean-spirited and wretched Jean's character is. And I want to suggest that she is still mean-spirited and wretched at the end of the film. I know that sometimes people say that because she has embraced her maid and called her best friend, that is a moment of redemption. But it feels to me very much like the moment at the end of Driving Miss Daisy, when Jessica Tandy's character turns to Morgan Freeman's Hoke and says, "You're my best friend." Kelly and I have talked about this character over the years, what James Baldwin called the faithful retainer. And we were talking about that you're one of the family. Maria is not one of the family. And if you watch the scene closely, you can see that she almost recoils. The power dynamic there is so extreme that she cannot respond to that in any powerful way. And I think that Jean is just as brittle and broken at the end of the film. And I think that actually is one of the most interesting things about this film, because Sandra Bullock is playing so powerfully against the persona that she's established for herself as like kind of minor league Julia Roberts, America's sweetheart. But I think at the end of the movie, she is just as unhappy, just as broken. And, you know, the simple fact of Maria's presence does not mean Maria's consent.
But we never see Maria. There's no reverse shot.
Yeah.
And so Maria, by the director's choice, is rendered mute. So we're not even getting in a sense of the dimensionality of that relationship, because the director is prizing the white interiority.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, go ahead, Kelly. I'm sorry.
No, I had a question that I wanted to, it's a question as a movie watcher. And when I saw this film the second time, so that I want to put to both you and Greg. In the end, when we have the scene with Jean's husband, the DA, and his assistant or his aide, the Black woman, what's the implication supposed to be there? That look, the fact that he's with, is the implication that an affair is going on here?
Well, if you remember from the beginning of the film, she says to her husband, she keeps calling you
Right.
I think something's going on. And he says, oh no, nothing's happening here. You can even have my battery for the phone. So there's the implication that there may be more happening between this man and his assistant than, meets the eye.
And could I just lean into Philip's earlier assertion that for Brendan Fraser to be the district attorney of Los Angeles,
It's a lump of flesh. I mean, the guy's career, and an absolute lack of charisma, lack of any visible talent. That man actually had a career as long as he did is a testimony that, anybody white can pull it off over here. But anyway, yeah. Woo.
One of the things I want to say from, again, a member of our audience, he says that it certainly portrays the powerlessness of the Black characters that they experience. And it also kind of, really says what happens in society. And I would say not just the Black characters, but the other characters.
Oh, the Latino characters. I mean, poor Michael Pena, who's a marvelous performer.
Right.
He's playing a noble savage. I mean, there's no edge to him. There is no visible, perceivable identity happening. He's kind of romantic. He believes in magic. He loves his child. I mean, simply there's nobody home there. They don't even give him a conflict.
And what about the Persian character?
And the Persian, even worse. I mean, bumbling, incoherent, incompetent, irrational, and so. Gosh.
And not to speak the Persian, and not to speak of the other Asian characters, right? The man that gets hit.
The Korean gal with the voice, and you can't the screaming, the screeching accent.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And every conversation in that film, I live in this place, which is a very polyglot environment, and every conversation is a race riot. What'd you have for breakfast? You call me this, there's not a natural kind of ease, or it doesn't portray the real complex microaggression or the real complex efforts at communication that actually occurs in life. And I think, and I feel like it deprived us of a real opportunity. And but the Academy and the institutions didn't want us to have that opportunity.
And you're talking about this coming from a white gaze, a white writer, screenwriters, and a white director. So that's the transition to the next and the last film, where we're talking about the Black gaze. So Kelly, if you could help to set up Black Panther. I mean, we're talking about an Afro-futuristic story. Where we then engage in a 2018 film that was a mega world hit. So can you set up the clip we're about to see, please?
Yeah, how does one set up a clip, right, from Black Panther? Now you've got a Black director, et cetera, and writer. I think that and of course, Black Panther, was a Marvel comic, and so its foundation is there. What's interesting, that Black Panther, as the Marvel comic, quote unquote, emerged the same time that the Black Panthers emerged in Oakland in 1966, and I think that's important to understand, because the clip that we see at the end and even at the beginning that starts in Oakland, it's no accident that what we're seeing is what is to be sort of this fantasy, because the Black Panther opens up with a bedtime story. I'm telling the bedtime story to a child about Wakanda, and so it sets up as this fantasy, and yet we then go to the basketball court on Oakland, in Oakland, and so they've connected already very, I think, astutely these the reality that's behind the comic, the Marvel comic. And so the Black Panther and the Black Panther, and as it does that, what you see are these almost two different realities or ways in which to engage, that Black people have tried to engage sort of the struggle to survive and be free. And that's what they set up from the beginning. And so then we go to Wakanda, this land of what if. I left the movie thinking just that question, what if Africa was never colonized and exploited, and there was a Wakanda that was this powerful nation, and that in Africa, presented Africa as sort of this pristine civilization with the power of technology that no other land had. Yet they had to hide because they knew if they didn't hide that they could be exploited. But they hid, but did they not have a responsibility to those who were not a part of Wakanda and had to live out their Blackness in the reality of white supremacy, colonialism, and all of that kind of stuff? So at the end, in the scene that we're going to see, it comes at the end of this struggle with all of these different what ifs and all of these different dynamics and themes and tensions that really run through what Black history and the struggle of trying to navigate the reality of Blackness in a world that's not Wakanda. And so what we see at the end is we're back on the basketball court. We're back in Oakland. We're back, and it's always like, who was the little boy? But we're back there, and the people from Wakanda have come, and they are sharing their power, their knowledge, their scientific knowledge, and taking responsibility for those who weren't saved, if you will, on Wakanda.
Why do you think this film, one, became such a cultural phenomenon worldwide? And then what does it say about race and interconnectivity?
Yeah, it became a cultural phenomenon worldwide. And so to answer that, I think begins with even why I walked out of that film feeling yes and empowered, because I didn't know anything about the Marvel comic strip. I didn't know that it came from that. Because that's not what I'm into. I knew nothing about that. So I walked into this movie just to see it on its own sort of merits. I was bringing no background into it, and found myself really mesmerized in this movie. And of course which I'm sure we'll get into, some flaws and problematic things. But I think when we think, this movie came out in 2018, and we had already been through the sort of first emergence, if you will, of Black Lives Matter, and the consistent reality and recognition of the lack of value of Black life. We're in the middle of the Make America Great Again vision, where that is becoming even more pronounced. And the fact that, it's even more pronounced is the reality of the not only fragility of Black life and the vulnerability of Black life, but the dispensability of Black life, if you will. And so here plops this film, right? And you're on the screen and you're looking at the power of, and the richness of what it means to be Black and represented in positive ways. And people are relating to Wakanda. And even now you hear people say, oh boy, we need to go to Wakanda. And we know that this became a symbol. And I thought about that. And I remember what it felt like the first time, and I've talked about this with Greg, when I first saw a Black person on screen when I was little. And that was Sidney Poitier. I didn't care about all the other stuff going on in the film. That I would become an adult before I started saying, yeah, the way they did that and portrayed that and all that. But at the time, I felt empowered because I saw a Black man on the screen that was a doctor. And I think that's what happened with this film, Wakanda. And that particularly for kids, and you finally saw representation in the reality of of what sort of a reversal, if you will, of a racial dynamic, though not really, because you still had that white savior thing, and I didn't understand that. But I think that was the power of the film, and so that kids, you see kids now, younger kids that watch this film, and what they're really seeing is the power of themselves. I like what Philip said at the beginning when he said he wondered how his father saw himself in that film of Casablanca. And I think that's so perfect, is that film allowed Black people to see themselves, particularly young Black kids, to see the power and the beauty of Blackness. Forget all the other flaws that we'll probably talk about, but to see the beauty and the power of Blackness and Black heroes, and even with the conflict and all of that, but to be able to see that and to see Africa. You forget all of the misrepresentation, but to see Africa in a different light. And I think that Wakanda, when people say Wakanda today, Black kids, and do this, you know what that was to me? And that's the connection, I think. I remember when we, growing up, and we went, Black Power. It was the fist of Black Power. And that's what Wakanda was. And so I think, that's how film can do so much more culturally. And that film did that.
Okay. Philip, did you were shaking your head?
Yeah. I mean, I watched it again today, and I'd seen it kind of cursorily on an airplane when it came out, and saw it today, and it's very beautiful and it's very powerful. I mean, and certainly the most, in many ways, it's a watershed event in racial history, and certainly we could posit a book idea that wipes out Crash and wipes out Casablanca, and let's flush the other thing down the toilet, and let's begin here. This is year zero. This is the beginning of the Common Era, or the Christian era, whatever you can call it, the Black Panther era, BPE, and I mean, basically, that this film, years ago, I remember trying to sell a project to somebody at a studio, a Paramount studio, and the executive on the corner office guy said, "These minority films don't travel, man. China doesn't want them, Europe doesn't want them. They want to see whites." And this was the common understanding. This is or the rationale that white execs gave, that this gave lie to that it made 1.3 billion, became a huge phenomenon, makes it matter in a way, and it's fathered and mothered many other projects now. Everything we're seeing now, Watchmen, and all the other things that have happened since the Frederick Douglass picture coming up. These are a debt of gratitude to the economic accomplishment of Black Panther. Let's forget the content for a minute, but its impact, where it really matters most of all, where capital, what it responds to, is performance in the box office, and it's a game changer.
Right.
There are things to be concerned about. I mean, certainly, you have to consider Scorsese's critique of Marvel, of the Marvel franchise, and his critique is, and I think I'm not a fan like you, Kelly. I don't watch that stuff. Unless there's a Black Panther 2, I won't be watching anymore either. But ultimately, these are highly corporatized projects. These are projects that, in Scorsese's words, don't take any risk creatively. And in doing so, because they're designed for mass distribution, they're designed for mass profit, and that's the overriding concern, they're not going to really able to take us anywhere ideologically. At a certain point, there's a cul-de-sac moment, right? Unlike great films, let's say of Scorsese Taxi Driver, for instance, that really challenge assumptions of the culture. Films of this size cannot be specific enough, and cannot be critical enough, and cannot be political enough to travel, even nationally, much less internationally, to make a difference. So I'm wondering to what degree this is a one-off experience, and maybe it's enough that we have one, and then now we can make more kind of nuanced films about Black and brown experience that don't have to make 1.3 billion, but can make plenty of dough and tell the rest of the story.
Okay, great. Greg, you were shaking your head. I know that there's this whole idea that certain films can provide a moral compass, and provide a picture into how characters can be transformed and become better versions of themselves as a stand-in for us. So, what did you think about Black Panther and its relationship in that regard?
Well, first, let me lean into Philip's idea about living in BPE. Because as we think about the trajectory of our evening, moving from the earliest Hollywood films to the present Hollywood films, I think there's a very real case to make for Black Panther as the anti-birth of a nation, pushing back against every harmful stereotype in that film, and giving us a chance to maybe see the world in a new way. So I've got a couple of things here. And again, this is me speaking out of my own identity about this film, which I do love. But Kelly, I've never told you this story. But shortly after you watched Sidney Poitier and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, I had been sent to Oklahoma to stay with my grandparents, who were farmers and ranchers in rural Oklahoma. And they took me into Watonga, Oklahoma, and I bought some comic books. And I bought the first Marvel comic book I had ever bought, 1968, issue 56 of The Avengers, where Black Panther and Captain America appear together for, I think, the very first time. And as somebody who grew up in the Deep South, and you all know that I have some real sensitivity around racism, there was this incredible experience of, oh, yes, here is a king who is powerful and crazy smart with all of this technology. Like, he is every bit the equal of Captain America, however we think about the white stereotype who represents whatever it is that America is. And I have never lost this feeling about Black Panther. And when the film came out, Kelly, you'll remember that it came out the weekend that we did our first Long, Long Way Film Festival.
That's true.
And our friend Yolanda Pierce, the dean of the Divinity School at Howard, was on the panel that night to talk about Get Out. And she had just come from watching Black Panther with a bunch of Howard students.
I was there.
And even as white as I am, I could not help being caught up in the enthusiasm and the joy of that moment. So when I think we think about moral imagination, and I lean very hard into Kelly's idea that we've got to interrogate all of these media products and celebrate what works and reject what doesn't. But I was reading a bunch of stuff in connection with our panel tonight, and I went back and took a look at Jamil Smith's Time cover article about Black Panther when it came out. And I'll share just with you a couple of sentences. He said, over the course of Hollywood history, there have been a bunch of biographical films about Black heroes and fictional films about Black heroes. But he said, Black Panther matters more because he is our best chance for people of every color to see a Black hero. That is its own kind of power. And I think that's an amazing thing about this film.
So Greg and Kelly and Philip, one of the questions that came from an audience member asked, well, why is Black Panther popular, not just with Black audiences, but with non-Black?
It's a spectacle, first of all. I mean, it's grand. It speaks the language of the blockbuster, right? Mm-hmm. So it's bigger than your life. It doesn't portray any problems you're familiar with, and so particularly Black cinema and marginalized cinema has been low budget and has not been able to afford these special effects. So, and I think it's global. It's reached. I mean, the scenes in Korea are just off the hook. I mean, these are fantastic. Mm-hmm. It's glamorous. It's sexy. Those bodies are delicious. And and I watched that. I was watching for that with the sound off. So, I mean, there's some beautiful people there, man.
Oh, definitely.
So, I don't know. That's all I have to say.
Okay.
See, I won't. Even though I don't have on my collar tonight, I'm still the Canon theologian, so I'll just let you say that part. but I can offer an amen on that. Oh, you know, as my sister would say, thank you, Jesus. But
What?
you
No, go
know,
ahead.
I think what all of what Philip said, I think is so that the costumes, the scenes, all of, I mean, it's just the richness of that, the tapestry of the film just pulls you in. And the other thing, you know, and then I'll say my last point, that you're seeing Black people on screen and you're seeing this Black hero, and yes, there are tensions and all of that and all these other themes that you really can talk about, Black history trajectories and all that kind of stuff, but you also can just enjoy the film. You know, it's not so fraught. You know, it's like you go in and you see 12 Years a Slave, which is wonderful,
Oh, yeah.
but you know, you come out so angry at white folks and everything. And in this film, you come out, it leaves you with a lot of what ifs. And that's what I like about it. It really does leave you with a lot of what ifs. But I think the other thing, the biggest what if, and keep using this word, this phrase, the moral imagination, it leaves us imagining the world a different way. It truly, you walk out of that film and you have a different vision of reality. And that, if to me, if nothing else, with forget all of the little flaws and all of that, you come out with a different vision of reality. And this is where a film actually expands our moral imagination of what is possible, not simply what is possible on the screen when it comes to the Black presence, but what is possible for our world and our reality. What if there was not the exploitation, colonialism, and all of that? What kind of world could we have? That's what I think is so powerful about the film. It expands our moral imagination.
One of the other questions that came from one of our viewers is she was wondering if the fact that the characters speak with an African accent adds or takes away from the message of the movie. I will say one of the things that in studying the movie, if you listen to Chadwick's T'Challa, King T'Challa,
Yeah.
it is he really kind of fashioned himself after Nelson Mandela. If you listen to Nelson Mandela speak, and then
Great.
you listen to Chadwick as King T'Challa, he that was his model. So what about that question? Did it take you away or take you out of the movie, the fact that they were speaking in various African dialects? And I think they did that on purpose. There's South African, there's West African, there's East African. So was that good or bad?
It didn't take, I thought it was good, I thought. And you're right, it was various dialects, which some particularly white critics criticized, but I took it as it was representative of that I asked for it. And actually I thought it was perfect for the movie, because these are people who maintain their dialect, maintain their culture and all of that, because it was not impacted and compromised by white colonialism and all of that. So no, I thought that it was important that they spoke in dialect.
Okay. One of the other questions that just came up was the whole issue of gender representation in the three films, not just in Black Panther, but the question of could you talk about the way in which racism and sexism intertwine in these films?
I've been talking a lot, so I'll let someone else say something first, and then I'll say something about that.
All right. Well, Kelly, let me jump in, because this is something that we talk about every time we do a program together. And so when we're talking about expanding our attention to common humanity, race has been the focus of this program, but of course, people's identity is the larger program that we need to be involved in. And so we have some interesting manifestations of that in the films that we talked about tonight. Ilsa is our primary character, and she's basically, which of these men am I going to end up with? So, that's not a particularly progressive thing. If we look at the characters in Crash, there are not very many, well, there are not any really, female characters who have an arc that we would want to spend much time talking about. But then when we get to Black Panther, we've got all of these crazy, strong women. I didn't want to add anything to what my sister Canon Douglas had to say about why this film matters, but I think for a whole lot of people it matters because this is an amazing depiction of strong, smart women, and that I think is one of the things that sets this film apart in a really powerful way. And so, like, if we think about the sort of swing from regressive depictions in Hollywood to more progressive depictions in Hollywood, I mean, we are certainly, if we're ending up here in BPE, Black Panther era, I hope that this is where we're going, where we are seeing everybody's humanity being reflected on screen.
Good. Go ahead, Kelly.
Yeah, so as much as I loved Black Panther, and I do, and think it's a powerful film for all the reasons that I said, and it presents obviously as a strong female cast and strong women in this movie. They're the warriors, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yet it's still very patriarchal. I mean, it's still a very patriarchal kingdom. Because the women are warriors, but and we see his sister at the end is the genius scientist and all of that, and so it negates or resists some stereotypes in that regard. Yet and still, it's still men in power. It's still a patriarchal nation, and so that's that's the tension. I mean, it's still, but then that's when it's a Marvel comic. And so it still keeps the strong male heroes, and the women are still beholden to them. And these women warriors are still warriors to protect him. You don't have any strong women leaders in this film in that regard.
Okay. All right. One of the other questions came up. This is for you, Greg. Why did you decide that Crash was a film to teach and to write about?
Well, in the Christian tradition, Jesus talks about how we'll know a tree by its fruit. And whatever critical questions we might have about Crash, every time I've taught it, I've had a powerful experience teaching it to people who look like me. And again, recognizing that I have the luxury of talking about baby steps and recognition being a first step. We talked in the last conversation from the front seat of my car about one of my students who had a really powerful recognition moment watching Get Out. And that is a thing, but it is only the first thing. And so I guess what I would say is that over the years that I've taught it, 10 years or so now, to students, to clergy, and largely white audiences, because as we've talked about, this is a movie made by a white filmmaker, written by a white screenwriting team. There are these contact moments that could turn into something more. And that is our hope as we do this anti-racism work. And it's what brought Kelly and Michelle and I together 5 years ago to start doing this work, because what we wanted to do was to break open people's experience in such a way that they could start thinking about the world and their place in the world in a different way. And so that is the experience that I've had over the years, regardless of how people think about the movie. White audiences have a reaction to it that is almost always a powerful moment of recognition that we live in a broken world. And then our job from that point is to push into that work of anti-racism and say, what are you going to do about it now? So that would be my answer. It is a purely practical question as somebody doing this work, as a teacher and a speaker, trying to find ways to encourage people to think about their experience and the experience of America in a different way.
Okay. All right. Philip, this may be a question that you can start with, but everyone can jump in if you so desire. And that is, how do we juxtapose these films set in the time frame that they're set in versus movies of today? What has changed since, say, well, of course, since Casablanca and Crash, but even since Black Panther in terms of movie making? No, not movie making, storytelling today.
But I'm not entirely sure how to address that question. Certainly, you know, I don't know how many movies were released in 1942 or rather, how many pictures how many major motion pictures were produced in 1915? Birth of a Nation. What year is that?
Not many.
15, yeah.
So you know, now that the opportunities and for watching your niche kind of programming have increased exponentially. So in a certain way, the opportunity for two films to become iconic has diminished considerably, because of the fact there's so much product for people to experience, and moreover, and an opportunity to all be witnessing the same program is also that the idea that, you know, when I was a kid, there were 3 networks and PBS, right? And everybody watched one of the 4 programs. Everyone watched the same events. Now we have we're broken apart, right? I think the term is going to balkanize the viewing experience. So we don't have a common mythologies to share vis-a-vis the film anymore. There will not be there'll not be a film when I don't have a son, but when I'm dying, I don't know that if that moment that I've experienced with my father, I'm not sure if the generations are going to share, or different races are going to share the same kind of film product in the way they did previously, fundamentally because of the ubiquity of the and then the small selection of films in 15 and 42, right? So, and I think the other thing that's happening is that it may be what BPE may also represent is a departure. And cinema becomes more and more increasingly global. It'll become, whiteness will be decentered because more and more of that film product will be coming from China, will be coming from India. Yeah, it is coming. The biggest producer of cinema in the world is India, and because of the Netflix business model now, national cinemas in Nigeria, in South Africa, in Mexico, and in Argentina have been resuscitated and revived because Netflix is marketing for their own national markets. So the notion that the empire here broadcasting its dreams, its mythologies for the rest of the world to consume is also going to be breaking down. And I think that's really, really interesting. So I think it's going to behoove all makers in this country to become more international in their thinking. And well, I'll stop it there. Poorly answered. I mean, wild, but it was something. Okay. Sorry.
Anybody else want to jump in? Well, here's another question then for you. I'd love to hear the panelists' recommendation for movies to watch that tackle race relation in an honest way, whether it's documentary or independent films as well as Hollywood.
I am not your Negro. I am not your Negro.
I am not your Negro.
Yes,
A film by Raoul Peck about the great James Baldwin. I don't think you can do better. I don't think you're going to watch one movie about race and thinking about race. That's a magnificent project.
It is.
Ditto, 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 ditto.
Yeah.
Oh,
From Hollywood, you know, Get Out is a very, very interesting satire, and Greg does some good writing about Get Out in his book. You know, and I think it's, you know, Turner Classic Movies is now revisiting and now showing more and more African American cinema. I think the films by the great my goodness, one blank, the fellow that made see, I just got nervous. Wow. The guy that made my goodness gracious, help me out, Greg. He made Los Angeles based, nope. Los Angeles based 70s, 80s, 90s.
Killer
Charles Burnett.
Charles Burnett.
you know, the film with Danny Glover, and he comes back to the family. What is that called?
Killer of Sheep? No,
No.
Killer of Sheep was his first one.
Yeah.
Oh Lord, yes.
I should have anticipated this question, but you know, Charles Burnett is a really important filmmaker, and he was getting ahead of this stuff. He was way ahead of the curve on this stuff. Highly recognized only in elite film circles, largely unrecognized in terms of the blockbuster. But there has been voices in making films for a long time that have said a lot of great stuff.
And even my colleague at Howard, who just retired a few years ago, Haile Garima, you know, has made several films that deal with global issues of race. And
I think it's worth. I want to recommend Judas and the Black Messiah, film about Fred Hampton, a Black Panther in Chicago, who was assassinated by the local authorities and FBI at the age of 21. Extraordinary project. Again, we're very lucky because the industry now is acknowledging stories that have been buried, and we're all tired of the white point of view. Let's face it. You know,
definitely.
after these MAGA guys, they burnt out the white project. You know, you want to talk about, you know, I'm sorry, you know, and you know we've you know, and you know, you have these immigrants coming in here. These people from Latin America and Asia, they're not enamored of whiteness in the way that a previous generation. They're not beholden to it. They're not fascinated by it. They don't need it. You know, so the race is going to become a much more interesting, varied in cinema moving forward, and that's a good thing.
Oh, we just were informed again. We love our audience. To Sleep with Anger is the movie you were talking about.
Thank you so much, audience. No,
We need
please
to.
get a chance. Get a chance. That's an
And
extraordinary
so
picture.
I have to push back on you just a little bit. Judas and the Black Messiah, I was not enamored of. I had my students read the script and analyze it, and for me, it really was about the Bill O'Neill character, who was not
Shady dude, but you know
shady,
what?
an anti-hero.
There's a plenty of legitimate criticism on that front,
Yeah.
but I think that's a way in for an audience that will have a very hard time relating to someone as morally exceptional as Fred Hampton.
Oh.
I think that compromised character is all of us, is most of us, who have endured 50 years of terrible politics, of remedial race politics, and who have made a deal with the devil in one way or another, who have made a deal with whiteness, who have made a deal with capitalism. And I think that shady weasel, Judas character, is more like us than Fred Hampton is, by and large, more like most of us than Fred Hampton is. And I think he's a way into the story that might be too pristine. Hampton's character might be too pristine and unrelatable. So
that may be true. That may be true. But again, I think that at least in terms of that particular film, I don't think we got enough of Fred Hampton's brilliance.
Yeah. And
listen, but that's just an entree. You know, there's documentaries been made about Hampton. There's books about Hampton. If you really want to know, go. You know, the film is not a library, but it's a great introduction to a story that this was marginal. The people weren't going to know about if not for this big publicized film. Anyway.
But and therein, to me, lies. I agree about the Fred Hampton character, and to me, therein lies probably the problem and the tension, because that might be the only thing that people see of Fred Hampton and of that period. But at the same time, what I liked about the film is the truth of what happened. And how people infiltrated it. I watched it right after. Don't do this, because more depressed through the day. But I watched that film because I'm a film sort of buff, so I wanted to see all these films before the Golden Globes. I watched that film. First, I watched Ma Rainey. Then I watched that film. Then I watched the U.S. versus Billie Holiday. And so you just come out. It's like, you know, you don't do that to yourself. But that character and the FBI character in the Billie Holiday, who's I can't think of his name now. I don't know why I can't think of his name. Fletcher, that set up Billie Holiday. I mean, you get it tells the truth of what happened, and the truth of the way these Black people were used, sort of in even the Martin Luther King film, FBI and Martin Luther King, and the Black photographer who infiltrated the movement. So, I think that's what at least these films began to lay bare, the insidious nature of the way in which white supremacy and white racism works, and the way in which they infiltrate these movements and try to destroy these movements and destroy a people.
And the other part of this is that, as you say, Philip, this might be Judith and the Black Messiah might be an entree to telling a broader story about not just Fred Hampton, but other stories around that. For instance, in my book about Richard Durham, who was a Chicagoan and was very active during this period, one of the things that happened after Fred Hampton was killed, because it so outraged the Black community, since it was a shoot-in and not a shootout as they portrayed it, the Black community after that, now this is 69, in 70, the state's district attorney in Chicago, who helped to orchestrate this along with the FBI and all, was running for re-election, and the Black community said, "Oh, heck to the no! We need to get rid of this guy," and they voted him out. And that was really the end of his political career. So, again, the power of the vote, but the power of another story that came out of that Fred Hampton, Black Panther, whole thing in Chicago. And it also shows that there are stories behind the stories that have yet to be told.
And which is why fundamentally I don't understand the need to apologize for old white stories. I'm over those. I don't need them anymore. They've done their damage. They've they've had their allure. And I say, let's embrace the stories that are undertold, that are untold, that all the stories that have been neglected as a result of white supremacy, and let's make them, and let's support them. They're our next mythologies.
Nice.
For the next America, right?
Yes.
The shifting of the gaze, right? To change the gaze.
Change the gaze. Or broaden the gaze.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Broaden the gaze.
Yeah, broaden the gaze. Well, no, let's change the gaze. But
I'm with the change.
Yeah, I'm with, yeah. Let's change the gaze.
All right.
Right. That's what BPE is all about. That's what Black Panther does. It changes the gaze, right? So let's change the gaze. It's time to change it.
Okay. All right. Any closing thoughts? I know we're about running out of time. Any closing thoughts that you'd like to share?
Well, let me pop in a tiny bit about important films. And I just wanted to mention some things that I've been teaching and that Kelly and I've been programming over recent years, because I noticed we had a question about Spike Lee in the chats. Kelly and I have talked about Black Klansman and Do the Right Thing on several occasions. And while we always have some reservations about Mr. Lee's depiction of female characters, these still are really powerful films. I've been teaching Do the Right Thing for 30 years now. And, we were talking about this moment of engagement with all kinds of audiences. So whether it's a white audience or a multiracial, multicultural audience, I have never been part of a program showing Do the Right Thing where we have not felt like it was absolutely of the moment. And then besides affirming I Am Not Your Negro, I also want to mention Ava DuVernay's 13th, which is just this incredibly powerful and thoughtful. And Philip corrected me a while ago about how film can actually deal with complex concepts. It's just how Hollywood features don't do a good job dealing with complex concepts. And I think 13th does this incredible job of relating how white people have tried to place Black people back into a position of subservience after slavery. And it's an all-star cast of intellectuals. It's powerful and engaging. So if you have not seen 13th, I would certainly commend that to you.
Okay. Kelly, anything you want to close with?
Parting comment is brief, and that is that films are not innocuous. They aren't innocuous discourse, and films reflect a culture, reflect a world, and films can also help us to expand our moral imagination to change the world.
Okay, great. And Philip, anything? Any
Listen, I've learned a lot today. I appreciated your voices and your marvelous questions, Sonia. And thanks to all the audience that tuned in.
And you have to copyright BPE.
Yes, indeed.
I give it to you.
Okay.
I thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
I've
so
learned
much. This was so rich and so wonderful and just such a lively conversation. And Sonia, I think we need to keep bringing you back because things just kept rolling. It was phenomenal. So Philip, thank you for being with us all the way from the West Coast. Sonia, thank you for jumping in. I know you've been to the event a couple of times. We're so happy to have you on stage, as it were, helping us out with the conversation. Kelly and Greg, as always, so grateful for your intention, your energy, your thinking, the ways that you all bring theology into this space and help us expand what theology is when we talk about movies and narrative and story and imagination so that we can live into it. So we hope to see you all next year, whatever long way becomes. Perhaps it'll be the new mythologies by the time we surface again in another year as we turn our gaze towards what we might cover in 2022, when hopefully we will be back in the cathedral watching some films. We will keep our fingers crossed, pray hard, and wear our masks to make sure that we can all be around to see that day. So thank you so much. Thank you to Broderick, the March on Washington Film Festival. Greg, thank you to Baylor, as always, for their support, and to the Austin Film Festival. And we look forward to seeing y'all soon. Take care, everybody. Thanks so much. And panelists, if you stick around for a few minutes, we'll turn your videos off, but we'd love to do just a mini thank you debrief after all the rest of the folks have left. So thank you all, and we'll see you soon, we hope.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was great.
Went pretty well, huh?
Yes, I think so.